Hey, welcome back to the videos. This is video 2 in the Understanding Capos series. And in the previous video, we looked at some basic mechanics of the capo. In other words, some tips and pointers about, where's a good place in regards to the fret to place the capo to minimize retuning issues and get good tone out of the banjo. And we also explored transposing ideas from open G to the key of A and the key of B. Now obviously the capo will also allow you to go to A flat, B flat, and if you have a capo that will go this high, you can go to the key of C at the 5th fret, and you can play the key of C sharp at 6 and the key of D at 7. My capo only goes to B, and I prefer not to capo past B because personally I'm just not a big fan of the sound of the banjo capo that high. And you also have to remember that every time you use the capo, regardless of the circumstance, you lose the frets behind it. So many times I'll choose to not capo because I want to have full access to the entire fingerboard, and I like having these lower tone notes down here to have as an option if I want them. But it's all good. It's all just a personal choice. If you have a capo that will go past C, then you can capo as far as you want. That's great. But all of those instances allow you to pretty much take G, open G ideas and transpose them. Okay, in this video I'd like to take it a little further and explore another use of the capo, and that is playing in other keys other than just open G. So for this video, I thought we would look at the key of D. Now, for most players, there's 3 options for playing in the key of D. You're either going to keep the banjo in standard tuning and learn how to play your stroke licks out of D chord shapes on the neck. If you're a melodic player, you're going to use melodic D scale patterns. If you're single string, you're going to play single string patterns all out of open G, and that works great. Endless possibilities for that. You can also tune down to D tuning and then tune your 5th string to either the 7th fret spike or a sliding capo, or tune it down to F sharp. And you can play songs like Reuben and John Henry, and you can play about anything in D tuning, that is tuning the banjo down to D tuning. But that means you're going to have to learn how to change your chord shapes to fit the new tuning and learn how to find these melody notes, because they're going to be on different strings in different locations now than you're used to because you've retuned the banjo. Probably an easier way to play in the key of D for most players, and it gives you instant access to the key of D, is to use the capo. Now I'm going to zoom the camera in a little more. Hopefully it'll stay in the frame. Let's look at one way to play in the key of D. Now obviously we could capo, if you have a capo that goes to 7, you could capo here, and that's probably the easiest way to play in the key of D on the banjo. And it's not to say that's a bad thing, because Eddie Adcock recorded the song Matterhorn with the Country Gentleman in the key of D, capoed at 7. So, if you want to do that, that's fine. But in this video, I'm going to look at probably the most prevalent way to do it, which would be to capo at the 2nd fret, capo the 5th string up to 7. Okay, now immediately you might ask yourself, wait a minute, John, we're now in A, right? Isn't that the key of A, capoed at 2? Right, it is if you play this way with open strings. What we're going to do to play in the key of D is we're going to allow the capo to reposition C position ideas. And you're like, well, how's it going to do that? Well, let me show you. If I take my fingers and place them directly over this capo, I'm thinking, well, how am I going to do that? Well, I'll just pretend that the capo is not here, and I'm going to put my fingers where they normally would reside in a D chord. I'm going to zoom in a little more. And if you notice here, my D chord is still in the same place it always has been, but now the capo is just intersecting part of the chord. And remember in the first video I called a capo an open string machine. And in this instance, that's exactly what it's doing. It's allowing you one open string. And how do you know that's an open string? Well, if you look, the capo is actually holding the second fret of the third string for me, which means that I no longer have to have this finger on the fingerboard. And something interesting happens. Not only has this capo given me an open third string to play, but it has intersected and chopped up this chord in a way that makes it look like something pretty familiar to most players. It looks like a C position. Now, obviously I wouldn't use these fingers to play a C position. You know, if I was down here uncapoed, I wouldn't want to hold my C chord like that. I would hold it like everybody else does, leave my pinky free. So in essence, what the capo has done for you, not only has it given you an open third string to play and allowed you not to have to hold that note, but it has allowed me to play a more familiar and easier to hold shape. Because let's face it, if you're having to hold this D chord for 5 or 10 minutes in a jam session during various parts of the song, that gets kind of tedious, and if you're not good at that, it's easier for most players to hold a C position because you have one open string. You don't have to hold, your wrist is not, you know, cocked out at this odd angle. You know, when you're playing a D position chord, you know, your wrist is kind of not in a very comfortable place and your fingers are spread out a little bit. So a C chord position is very comfortable, but this is an important thing to remember. This is not a C chord. This is still a D major chord. The only thing that's happened is the capo has given you an open string to play, and it has allowed you to reposition your fingers into something that's more comfortable. But you're still playing a D chord. You've just modified it slightly into something that's a little more familiar. Now, you might say, well, that's cool, John, but now how is that advantageous other than it's easier to hold? How is this really going to help me play in the key of D? Well, not only can you hold a D chord that looks like a C position, making it easier to hold, but it also allows you to transpose or move all of those C licks that you learned and play them in the key of D without changing anything about them. Which is another key advantage of using a capo, is if you choose to do it this way, you can transpose licks that maybe could be more familiar to you. Maybe C licks are a little more comfortable and you're more familiar with playing in the key of C down here in the first position than you are playing in D. So, but always remember, and I teach my students this, do not assume that because this looks like a C that you should call this a C. This is, yes, could be called a C position, but is actually just a D chord that's been modified. So this is still D major. So another important thing about using a capo to play in other keys like D is that it does not change where chords are on the fingerboard at all. It changes nothing about the chord shapes other than it may intersect some strings, give you open strings to play, but the chords that you know are always in the same places. Everything behind the capo now is unusable, but you've gained an advantage. Even though you've lost a couple of, you know, notes here, you've also gained something that's probably maybe easier to hold and more familiar. So that's probably the #1 way to use a capo to play in the key of D. Now again, you can capo at 7, and that will allow you to take all your G rolls and licks and you know, transpose them to the key of D. But remember, everything behind the capo is now non-usable, so by capoing at 7, you've lost 7 frets. So in my way of thinking, the reason I don't use the capo in these higher positions is because I want to keep as many of these lower notes available as possible. But for many players, playing in the key of D, capoed at the 2nd fret out of a C position is a viable option and one that's easier to do. So I appreciate it, and we'll see you next video. Thanks.